Welcome to Workday Compensation Eligibility Rules. In this session, we'll review how to assign eligibility rules to compensation components and summarize how the eligibility rules can populate compensation data. You will also learn about the order of precedence that Workday uses to determine what compensation components should default if there are multiple defaulting approaches in place. An eligibility rule specifies a set of criteria that Workday uses to identify and automatically associate a group of employees with compensation components, such as packages, grades, and plans. Eligibility rules drive what compensation data populates, and that information guides managers or compensation partners during transactions. Eligibility rules can also identify populations eligible for a localized profile within different grade profiles, and, if applicable, any plan profiles. Localization allows for variations in salary ranges and plan targets based on criteria, such as a worker's location. Eligibility rules also ensure that if a manager is responsible for completing the transaction, they cannot select compensation components that the employee is ineligible for. However, if a compensation partner completes the transaction, they may have security permissions to override the default values and choose to add, edit, or remove components during the transaction. Eligibility rules are foundational for defaulting compensation in Workday. It's important to set up rules correctly. Rules must map to packages, grades, grade profiles, plans, and plan profiles to ensure accurate defaulting during a transaction. This means employees are eligible for only one compensation package. Employees are eligible for only one compensation grade. And if localized pay ranges are required, they are only eligible for one compensation grade profile. Also, the relationship between packages and plans is important. Any plans that should default need to also be in a package. However, any plans that should be selectable for a specific group of employees, but should not default, need to have an eligibility rule, but should be outside of a package. You can use different defaulting methods to drive what components populate during a transaction for an employee. Workday considers an order of precedence to determine what compensation components should default in if there are multiple defaulting approaches in place. For example, in Workday HCM, you may choose to only use compensation eligibility rules to drive what compensation components an employee is eligible for. You may also have compensation defaults set at the position level. If you're using compensation eligibility rules along with position compensation, then the components assigned to the position take precedence and default in during the transaction. Also, if you map your compensation grades directly to job profiles in Workday HCM, then the system overrides any other grades an employee may be eligible for through rule logic. The grade that's assigned to the job profile will default in. Compensation can also default from the offer or employment agreement business processes. If you're using Workday Recruiting, then compensation defaults are set at the requisition level. If you are using requisition, offer, or employment agreement compensation, then these components will override any position compensation or compensation components the employee is otherwise eligible for through eligibility rules. Eligibility rules are important drivers for defaulting compensation elements and reducing data entry errors. As we've learned in this session, we can use eligibility rules to drive what compensation data populates during a transaction. We also reviewed the order of precedence that Workday considers when multiple defaulting methods are in place. Thank you for taking the time to learn with Workday.